And if you could just introduce yourself.
I play keyboards in Alice.
My name is Anna Maria, and I am the founder and vocalist in the band Bajra.
What was the initial start?
So we all have pretty storied histories.
I was just bored during COVID. Did a little demo, put it out, and it was pretty well received by the community. And
always had a thing for horror punk and stuff.
Something that started with me and a laptop during quarantine, and just like, oh yeah, all those times I said, if only I didn't have to work my job all the time, and now like I could have time to do that. Well, now this is that.
All right, and welcome to the show. For those of you at home that may not know what's going on, we have a very surprise announcement here. And Dan, why don't you introduce yourself and what you're doing here on the show?
Hey guys, I am Dan Phillips, and I am the owner slash CEO of We Are Horror Records.
For sure. Welcome onto the show. So I believe the reason you wanted to be on the show is because you have a big announcement coming up. There's going to be a series of shows all kicking off at the same time, right?
Yeah. So basically, people have probably seen the posts online so far, but obviously, you're going to have different reach to what I have and that kind of thing. So basically, we are going to celebrate the label's second anniversary because the label's first anniversary, we were actually in hiatus. So I wasn't doing much of anything label related. But in the new year, brought the label back, trying harder than ever to sort of make a success of this thing. Seems to be going okay so far. So, so far so good. So, yeah, we're going to put our first label-centric show on here in the UK. 3 bands from the label and one basically special guest, like the headliner. It's a band that I've been courting for a while, but we'll see. There might be a little bit too big for me yet, but maybe next year we'll see.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that. When exactly is the show? Obviously, people have seen it on the flyers and stuff. For those who haven't, when is the show going to be, and where are they going to be at?
Right, so obviously this is more centric to the UK audience. Unless people are fancying catching a plane, coming over, that's cool. So the show is Friday, the 11th of October at Redrum in Stafford, which is about 45 minutes from where I am right now, which is perfect for me. I wanted to pick somewhere where it wasn't going to be a pain in the ass for everybody to get to, because a couple of the bands from up north, a couple of the bands from down south, and I'm sort of in the middle. So it's always quite difficult to sort of get everybody in one place because the bands up north tend to play like primarily up north. And the bands down south tend to stay down south. London. I mean, some bands could just like never leave London, to be honest. And you could like live on that kind of thing. So, trying to have like a central gig, and hopefully that will enable people to come from all over because we're in the middle. So that should hopefully work.
Wow, that's so cool, man. So let's talk a little bit about your label itself. You said this is the second anniversary, and you mentioned the hiatus. Let's talk a little bit about how this all started for you, and then we'll kind of work our way to the present day.
Yeah. So basically, the sort of the genesis of the label. I was doing a radio show on Moshville Radio, which began as a one-man show. Horror Punk's Not Dead. Eventually, I brought in John Mahoney, aka Vin Fiendish. We were together for a little while. It only just became apparent that it was becoming more of a sort of movement than just a radio show, that we were getting like a social following, we were getting interest in other things. So I sort of happened upon the idea of like putting together a compilation album, and it just sort of dawned on me like, this would be really cool to have like a label to do this stuff with. So We Are Horror Records was born, and for a while they sort of worked hand in hand. But then I think my interests and my drive ended up sort of like moving more towards the record label side of things, because radio is cool, but like nobody can see you. You know, you just, well, I mean, to be honest, like my position isn't that much different these days. But you know, I'm sort of hiding behind the record label banner. Um, but you know, I don't sort of have to put myself out there so much.
Mm.
You know, I can still do what I was always doing previously, which is like PR type stuff and
Mm.
that kind of thing, but more sort of anonymously. You know, obviously a lot of people know me. You know, I speak to a lot of people, and I used to do, you know, what you're doing right now much better than I was, I can add.
Well, thank you.
And you know, so you know, I had my hands in a few pies kind of thing at the time, so I've just sort of like hyper focused now on the label, and I kind of just want to like endeavor to push the bands as any good label should. Like, you know, fortunately, I mean, I'm not in a position where I can sort of like show favoritism in any kind of way. So, you know, I'm not in a band like, you know, I have questionable talents. So, you know, I can apply what little talent I do have and, you know, try and, you know, help out the bands the best way that I can, basically.
For
So that's
sure.
where we are, you know. Initially, like when I first started back in October 2022, yeah, that's 2 years ago. Basically, everyone was very excited. I was excited. The first compilation had sold well. And basically, I think what happened, I was kind of running before I could walk a little bit. I was sort of started off great, and I think then basically I was trying to do too much too quickly,
Mm.
and sort of shot myself in the foot a little bit and kind of got myself in a bit of like a muddle.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like, and then things happen, you know, things happened at home and things like that. So I was just like, I need to like take a step away from this for a bit.
Mm.
And, you know, it was quite, nothing untoward happened or anything like that. But, you know, it was a pretty clean sort of like, you know, break for a lot of people. And the hiatus, I mean, it was a tricky situation because it was not exactly cut and dry.
Hmm.
So, you know, obviously some bands have like gone to other places, and like other things have like come up from, you know, from nothing kind of thing, which is all cool, you know. So when I found myself in a position to sort of actually, you know, dedicate some time to this and bring it back, that's basically the first thing that I wanted to do as such. So, you know, January this year, like I've been back, not done a lot, which to be honest has actually helped me quite a lot. So I mean, literally so far this year, we've done the Deathtones Universal Monsters EP. They're going to be doing another version with, I believe it's Bishop Records in the US. They're going to do a
Cool.
vinyl. I don't know if that's common knowledge yet, but surprise. um, and obviously, Horror Punk's Not Dead Volume 3 dropped April 5th. Still sitting on shed loads of CDs to mail. I mean, I've spoken to you like off the air about this a bunch of times, but I've currently got a broken foot. So obviously, getting to the post office and things like that are sort of a bit of a pain in the ass at the moment. But you know, people will get their stuff. You know, it's the same old, same old. You know, independent record label. If any distribution companies want to come and help me out, then you know, please email me. You know, because I could use some help.
Oh, for sure. I'm laughing right now, audience at home, and Dan's smiling because he pointed out to me I apparently have a catchphrase where I say for sure a lot. And this whole interview, I've been trying to minimize that. Uh, anyways, I first of all, I want to go back and talk a little bit about that. Your you know, the history and everything that you've gone through. Um,
Mhm.
I have been following you guys for a while, and I wasn't there at the very, very beginning, but since came along, and I've been a big fan of your guys' record label. I've off air I've talked to you quite a bit, and one of the things that I've always said is that I like the way that you are selecting bands and the way that you're marketing them. Like you said, you don't have any favoritism kind of going into this. You don't have any stake in anything, in that kind of way. And I just really kind of appreciate what you have done for the bands in the scene, whether they're horror punk bands or horror rock bands, whatever we want to define that is, because I know that term kind of gets thrown around a lot, and I always treat it like a literary kind of term, more than I treat it as a like a literal genre, because I don't want the bands that are in that to feel limited to one style or another. And I was just kind of curious how you felt about that.
No, I completely agree. I'm basically looking to move away from strictly horror punk, and I guess I just want to sort of bring more. I want to keep it horror, obviously, because of the record label name, but I'm looking at sort of metal bands. I mean, I listen to. I mean, I'm like an unapologetic metalhead. I love like post-hardcore, hardcore punk, certain brands of hip hop, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm going to be releasing hip hop, but there is a market for horrorcore. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be sort of like more the root of horror music rather than strictly horror punk. Horror punk obviously makes that up, but as you said, I don't want it to sort of be like limiting. Obviously bands are going to be creative, and I for one am trying to get them to experiment more. What's the point in sort of like just knocking out another 15 Misfits tracks? We've heard it 25 times. Oh look, a record label's done another Misfits tribute album, woohoo. It's like how many Misfits tribute albums can we do, kind of thing. I mean, obviously I've got some tribute stuff coming up, and hopefully people will appreciate the fact that I'm looking towards the new wave, rather than just sort of resting on constant Misfits and just the same old stuff. It's fine, it's cool, it's part of what makes this scene, but it's not what I want to focus on.
Yeah. No, for sure. I have been having this kind of online conversation with people for a little while now regarding that same kind of idea of like there are big bands in the scene that like people outside of it actually know, right? Like everyone knows the Misfits. If they know anything about horror punk, they know the Misfits. Past that, they're probably going to know Blitzkid, maybe Calabrese. I can think of like a handful of other bands, but there are so many bands with so much talent that just no one knows about unless you delve into this niche world. And it's not even like they're bad bands. They're really solid bands, but a lot of the majority of any scene is kind of made up of a bulk of bands that kind of don't put in the effort to find their own sound. And that's what I've been really like kind of hammering on lately is like, yeah, it's okay to take influences from things. It's okay to like pull from that, but you should be trying for something more. Offline or online, you mentioned you'd like to hear more bands that are doing horror reggae or ska or something, and I'm all about that. Like whatever it is that you're pulling from, a horror metalcore band would be savage. I would love to hear more horror metalcore.
I have been speaking with a horror metalcore band, so keep keep the eyes peeled for that one, because we might have something on the horizon.
Surprises, you heard it here first, folks.
But yeah, I spoke of the notion of horror ska not too long ago, and I was quite surprised at the amount of people that just sort of were like, oh, and I was like, guys, come on, you got the Independents, you've got bands like Crypt Keeper 5 have got like lots of ska stuff going on. There's I personally listen to like ska punk, like Less Than Jake, Real Big Fish, all those kind of bands. So why not?
Oh, I'd be absolutely here for it. And it would be so easy to make the association with like zombies and things like that, given the cultural roots of both ska and of
Yeah.
like zombie films. It's like an obvious thing, and I don't know why more bands haven't done that. And you can do spooky sounding ska. I'm thinking not even, I think it was a two-tone band out of the United Kingdom is I don't forgive me for this audience at home. They had a song called Ghost Town, and yes, yes, and it has that haunting, spooky vibe all throughout it. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, well, they already showed some of the blueprint. They've got the DNA there. Pull it out, guys. What are you waiting for?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's a tangent for another time.
Yeah.
Um,
Just speaking about Ghost Town, I'm not sure if you heard it. It might have been on the CD only version of the Siblings of Samhain album that
ooh,
they released before the EP we did. They
mm,
actually did a cover of Ghost Town, and it's pretty fun.
I have not, but I'm definitely going to check that out. Speaking of them, and let's talk about who are the bands on your label currently?
Oh, good question. I'm sitting in front of a list because it's getting more sort of, prolific by the day. So, I mean, I'll break it down into countries. That's probably the easiest way to go. So we've got Los Morts from Peru who came back.
Oh,
Um,
welcome.
Welcome back, yeah. I mean, I don't chase bands necessarily. People just talk to me, and I just say, have you sorted out everything that you need to sort out? Cool. Okay, then we can talk. Apart from that, I don't tend to sort of meddle with bands. Like I
Mm.
let people come to me. So I'm just going to say that flat out. um, there's a band from the US which I can't currently mention because we're not ready to announce that yet, but they're coming back to the label. I'm not sure if anybody actually knew they were on the label in the first place, but we've been talking for years, so it's hard to keep up with these things. Obviously, recent interview did Pretty with the Lights Out. Nate, he's on the label. He's one of my staple guys. The Deftones, they're like a staple band for the label. Won't Stay Dead from Chicago, awesome band, second album coming soon.
Oof.
It's good. It's good. I've been listening to the early mixes most of the week. Tracy and the Phantom Punks, they're like a recent signing from Texas. Awesome bands. I'm going to be meeting up with Jay from them. He's on vacation in Germany and the UK. As to why you would come here on vacation, I've got no idea. Like because we all want to leave, so people coming here is always like alien to us. Um, let's see. We've got Pumpkin Guts from Kentucky, Tomb of Nick Cage from New Orleans, and then the UK bands. We're talking most recent signing Das GHOUL from Oxford, I think Wiltshire, sort of like down south. Siblings of Samhain, who are again a staple of the label. I mean, Bill. I mean, to be honest, Bill from Siblings of Samhain, he's basically like behind me as I speak. He's like like the shadow in the label. Like he's my sounding board for when I've got just like crazy ideas going on. He helps me with mastering of things, mixing of things, audio things. I can do a little bit, but he's the man.
Mm.
And Toria and The Terror from Liverpool, who are recent signing rather. Two singles out at the moment, both very different to each other. But they're going to be dropping, I think, a 9 or 10 track album later in the year. So we're working on that currently on the quiet.
Right on, right on. So with all this going on, you've got all of these bands coming together, and you've got all this momentum and traction you've been building, and you've got these shows coming up. What do you have planned for the future? What is the direction that you're going to be going with the label?
Oh, is it too brash to say, is it too brash to say world domination? Yeah, I don't know. I want the label to succeed, and I want the bands to succeed more so.
Mm.
But I also want sustainability. I want healthy, sustainable growth where
Mhm.
it can still be managed and respect. Like, I want people to sort of like think of the label in a good way, people
Yeah.
wanting to work with us, that kind of thing, like having like people wanting us to be their home, you know. That's sort of what I really want from the label as such. I mean, I there's no room for a label head in the
Mhm.
fame world. Like, it's not about me, it is about the bands.
Mhm.
And I'm basically, I exist as a label to service every band on the roster the best that I can. Be that sort of, PR stuff, artwork things, mixing and mastering, helping just with general sort of like spitballing of ideas, listening to demos, like saying, whether something is like a hit or a miss, just all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, sustainable, healthy growth, and I think the main aim is to be here in 10 years' time, and we can have another chat.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, what I've noticed a pattern, and it's interesting to me. So I've got two things I'm holding on to my mind from what you just said. The first
Mhm,
is this pattern, and that is the I noticed that the last couple of bands are from the UK, and I wanted to
mhm.
talk to you specifically about the talent that is in the UK. Um,
Yep.
I know that there are a lot of bands in the UK that we have no clue about over here. Like, just zero idea. And every time I've seen a new band that you've signed, I'm brought up into this whole new like space and scene that I have like no connection to. What do you think about the UK is different about America that is making the bands that you've recently signed? I'm not saying all the bands over there are like this, but recently signed, that gives them such a distinct and different sound to the other bands that and I'm not even saying that that's like the American bands that you've signed. All of the bands you've signed have a
Mhm.
unique and distinct sound. But I'm saying other bands in the scene, the British bands that you've signed to your label, they stand out. Like, they have a unique kind of style to them that is
Mhm.
different than the American kind of style, even if all the bands do sound different.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, a lot of it is just to do with like musicians' mindset as such, because although like these bands are identifying as like horror punk or horror based, you can just tell straight out that like their influences are just like far wider.
Mm,
And I think we, maybe just as a nation, we're not so afraid to like have things on our sleeve.
mm,
They're happy to show their influence on their sleeve. They're happy to sort of like mix things up more. They're not afraid to sort of fail. They're not afraid to do something that's sort of like off the wall.
mm,
Um, I know it's a weird one. I mean, because obviously in America, you guys had the Misfits, etc., from like the 70s, 77 to 83, and then obviously for a lot of people my age, the Misfits for us began in 1995 because we didn't get a lot of like that kind of music over here. A lot of it was
mm,
filtered through MTV, Kerrang, Scuzz, all these other kinds of like channels that were throwing it in. And so, a lot of people's first taste of horror punk over here would be the Graves era Misfits, Dig Up Her Bones, the music
mm.
videos, Scream, American Psycho music videos, those kind of things. So I think maybe a lot of our horror punk and like that kind of music here is different because we were sort of like fed from a different sort of like influence
Mm.
stream, if that makes
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah, no, it
basically.
does.
And it's just what I mean, don't get me wrong. We have bands here that are basically doing the Misfits shtick, which again is fine, but I think a lot of the reason that you won't see them on the label is, as we've spoken about, like I've not really, I have no real interest in just like doing Misfits 2.0, Misfits
Mhm.
3.0, etc. It's just like, what's the point? We've got the Misfits. The Misfits are still touring, for Christ's sake. What's the, just listen to the Misfits, because you're not going to do it as good as they did.
Mhm.
Um, that's probably the reason that they've done nothing new with Danzig, for instance. Like, there's literally not going to be any new material or that kind of thing, because I think they know that anything they do is going to be like directly compared, and it's probably not going to be favorable.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Obviously.
diehard fans of the Misfits, they go in hard for how it used to be. And like the like I love the Misfits. I love all eras of Misfits like you. I came in that same Graves era and love the man, hate the man, however you feel about him. That's, between, you and whoever else. The music that he put out, it was objectively talented. They were a good, solid band. I'll never take that away from, what they did at that time. Um, I obviously have indicated to the audience I have my thoughts and feelings on the matter, but I would never take that away from, from what they did. They built an incredible sound and they're an incredible band. And I think you're right. Now that Danzig is back, touring with the Misfits and stuff, even after Jerry Only was singing there for a while as the head of the band, like every successive new iteration of the Misfits is always like, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. Well, the bands have to try something. They have to grow. They have to go other places. Misfits aside, this applies to every band. And so it's kind of sad, but I think you're right. I think the Misfits fans are the reason we're not going to get new Misfits songs, unfortunately.
But yeah, it's just like it's very insular, the scene as such. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, by the same token, there are a shed load of like awesome bands at the moment. I mean,
Oh
you've got
yeah.
your Evelyn's Casket, your 5 Cent Freak Show, Tomb Tones, Won't Stay Dead. All of these kind of like new bands that are sort of making interesting music. Obviously, you've got your old staples like the other Blitzkid, Nimvin, Calabrese, all of these sort of like what I would call the second wave bands. You know, it's there does seem to be a resurgence at the minute of like just the genre in general. It seems to be within the last like 2 or 3 years that it's sort of like making a spearhead again, where it's just it really does work. I've lost my train of thought.
No worries, no worries.
It's just like
I completely agree with you. Like I've noticed that pattern too, and I've indicated it on the show several times. The the trajectory of these bands and the talent that these new artists are bringing in, I think a lot of it has to do with what you were speaking on earlier, which is that, some of these bands, and I'll specifically shout out Evelyn's Casket here, and bands like Dark Ride or Darker Days, they're taking in other influences, more modern influences, and applying it. I like to say that Darker Days reminds me of like a horror punk version of Rise Against, and maybe that's not a fair comparison, but like I dig it. I love what they're doing. The band Energy was going somewhere for a while. If I remember correctly, they even did a tour before they, kind of shelved themselves for a minute there in the UK where they opened for Creeper. And like that's huge because Creeper right now, they're blowing up. They're really going places both, over there and over here.
It's funny you mention Darker Days and Energy in the same sentence, because I was speaking to Jason from Energy. And from what he was saying, his backing band at the time was basically Darker Days and him as Energy. So that tallies, And yeah, you speak about bands like Creeper and that ilk. It's just like that type of horror punk with the sort of innate, like sort of My Chemical Romance sort of like flavor, the sort of like the slightly more emo stuff, like the more
Yeah.
radio friendly, like pop punk kind of elements added in. Although it won't probably appease your diehard horror punk fan, the sort of like the old grimy horror punk dudes. But it's blowing up, like you say, like people like it, and I'm not necessarily telling everybody that they need to sell out, but
Yeah.
don't be afraid to branch out.
Yeah, well, and that's what I mean. It's like these bands, they don't have the same hangups. It's like the bands over in the UK that you're talking about, that different influence streams.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the second wave bands or whatever, they heard the Misfits, they fell in love, they found a blueprint, and that's what they went with. And that's great. Like I like the blues, for example. I've used this a few times. You can distill the blues down to a basic formula. And even today, you can write a beautiful blues song that just sounds incredible, but it better
Mhm.
be a good blues song. It better stand out.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like we've all heard the 145, all of that over and over and over again. And so it's harder and harder for musicians to kind of replicate that formula. Before I want to move on though to that second thing really quick that I mentioned earlier. And that is I've noticed that you have put in a lot of work in helping build this scene. And I wanted to say this because online uh there have been a lot of like bands that have come to your label and stuff, and even if they had like recognition before, um
Mhm.
the work that you've put in, whether it was through your radio show or whatever else, I've gotten so many people when they come and they talk, to me about you, yes, people talk about you behind your back, Dan. But I promise you, like 99% of everything I hear is always, "Oh, I'm glad I got to work with Dan. I'm thankful for the work he's putting in for the scene and stuff." And I just want you to know genuinely, like, as someone who's been interacting in this circle for such a short time, this is like a genuine thing. We really do appreciate the work that you have put in and the help that you've done as a label head and, running your radio show and everything else. This kind of momentum doesn't build in isolation. It requires people like you to do what you're doing, to create a rallying post for bands to come to and kind of go forward. And I just wanted to say, thank you for that. On just because as a fan of the music, like it's been really easy for me to find good bands to listen to because of what you're doing. Um, I also wanted to do this. I told Dan I was going to do this. I bought one of his label's hoodies a while ago, a good while ago, and I've worn it and worn it and worn it. And I just wanted to show you guys it is still pristine. So if you're ever going to buy something from Dan, whether it's jackets or whatever, just so you know, he puts in quality and effort into all the products that he's selling, whether it's his work with the CDs on the label, whether it's the clothing, he makes sure it's good quality stuff. Before we go, Dan, is there anything you want to shout out? Any bands you want to shout out, or whether they're on the label, off the label, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you for your kind words. You're going to make me cry. um, yeah, man. I mean, like I say, there's a lot of good bands kicking around at the moment. The scene is more sort of affluent than ever. We're sort of spoiled for choice, really, with good bands. I mean, not to sort of like try and like resell the Horror Punks Not Dead compilations, but I think, for anybody sort of initially getting into the genre, um, simply because the Fiend Force, this is Horror Punk 1 and 2 are so fucking hard to find. This might be an easier avenue in. And we feature some of the same bands as well. So, that kind of helps. But yeah, it's the same old people. So it's, your Evelyn's Casket, your 5 Cent Freak Shows, Pretty with the Lights Out, Love Nate,
Yeah.
he's a sad guy. Pumpkin Gut, very excited about those guys. They're going to be huge. I can just feel it.
Mm.
Uh, Toria and The Terror got a hell of a lot of talent, and I'm going to be really interested. And I'm quite excited that I'm able to be more hands on with those guys in general. Won't Stay Dead, I think, are going to surprise a few people with their next album. I'm not. That's all
Awesome.
I'm going to say about that. Boogeyman, Ryan Zelma, good friend of mine. They've got their second album coming out this year. So that's going to sort of blow the doors off. um, just trying to think. Who else is doing stuff? This is the problem when you sort of put on the spot, isn't it? You just like, it's just hard to think about all these things. I mean, obviously, the new Creeper album is great.
Mm.
Uh, if people haven't checked out Will Ghoul's side project, Salem, I implore you to do so. Very good horror punk. That is more strictly horror punk rather than your sort of emo-esque type stuff. So, that's generally what I'm listening to, sort of like um, more radio friendly pop, sort of emo type punk, or just like deathcore or doom or sludge or just disgustingly heavy stuff. It's like just opposite ends of the spectrum. That's basically where I sit, you know.
For sure, for sure. Well, thanks, Dan, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And always welcome back on. Thanks for thinking of us to do this announcement, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, brother.